Okay, so it's recording started. So we'll make a start. So this is part of the legislative guidance series. We're doing one a month. Next month is going to be work at heights, which is applicable to some of you, but not to everybody. For example, real officers are really interested in work at heights. But Ruth, in your business, you'll be very interested in work at heights. This is paperwork, friend or foe. And I suppose what we're trying to do here is just make people aware of the issues with paperwork, how it can be your friend, and unfortunately, how it can be your enemy, because it can drop you in it in some cases. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at an introduction. Why are we talking about it in the first place? Look at the basic requirements. I'm not going to go through all requirements and issues because you need a couple of days to do all that. So we're going to just summarize the key requirements. We're going to look at the mistakes that people make. What are the common mistakes? We're going to look at the courts and how the courts look at paperwork and how they evaluate paperwork and how it's worked. I've got an example for you, which is recent, and we can show you how it can get people in a bit of trouble. And the advice, as always, is keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Say what you do and do what you say. That's the key. Otherwise, it becomes very complicated. So paperwork can be your friend. How? Well, it complies with legislation, so it meets that requirement. It's specific to your activity, so it reflects what you actually do. Staff are informed and trained in relation to it, which is very, very good. And clear and accurate records are available. So I'll give you an example. We don't want this to happen to anybody, but let's say there's an accident in the workplace and the HSA come out to review it. They're looking for 4 or 5 things. First, they look, has the person been inducted into the workplace? Have we got evidence of that? Has the person signed off on a safe procedure or policy for the work that we're engaged in? And is that policy and procedure, including associated risk assessments, are they appropriate and correct for the activities? Has the person got the appropriate training for the activities that they're engaged in? And has the organization got a safety statement in place that reflects their activities and is up to date? And finally, they would look at, is there effective supervision in place? You know, are people being supervised? And the higher the level of risk, the greater the level of supervision that's required. So how can paperwork be your foe? Well, it doesn't comply with legislation. I had it today, just a document come in and the legislation is way out of date for a project that's starting in the next few weeks. It's not specific to your activities. We get this a lot where the information isn't specific to what you do. It's very general, or it's been taken from somewhere else, or it hasn't been updated for new ways of doing things or new equipment. Staff are not informed of the policies and procedures and aren't trained in the policies and procedures. So, you know, these are, again, so you have a policy that says, oh, we do this, this, and this, and we train staff, etc. And then something happens and we find that, yes, the policy's there, but people aren't trained in it. So you're shooting yourself in the foot by having a policy saying how you do things, but don't do what you say. Records are not accurate. This is one of the biggest ones. You know, it's hard to get records. They may be not clear. They may be missing or inaccurate. So what are the requirements? So the requirement is to demonstrate effective safety management based on the nature of activities that you're engaged in. So if you've got an office environment, you know, the activities and procedures, the procedures should reflect activities that you are involved in and the facilities that are there. With Ruth in Silo Clean, you're working in a lot of high-risk activities and working for sites where there are significant risks, and of course the documentation has to. And Brendan, with the CE2 schemes, you're the same, where people are working on specific things and they should be trained on what they're doing, and the policies and procedures should be there for them. So safety statement. So the safety statement should reflect the organisation and what it does, up to date with legislation, etc. Your policy and procedures should be in place. Safe systems of work for the work that you do. And really, when we're talking about safe system of work, we are talking about where there's risk. Where there isn't risk, then the question is there a requirement for a safe system of work? Well, it may be because of quality or for other reasons that you may want it, even though risk isn't there. So companies still use safe systems of work for different things other than risk activities. Appropriate levels of training and instruction to make sure people have the appropriate training and instruction based on the risks they're being exposed to and in line with the policy that's in the organization and in line to legislative requirements as well. That effective supervision is in place. And again, this can be demonstrated by checklists, reviews, evaluations, competency assessments of staff, etc. And risk assessments reflect the activities that you're doing, you're engaged in, what those hazards are, what the control measures are. And they vary from activity to activity. And sometimes it's dynamic. For example, if you're as a contractor, you're going to a different site and you've got to understand the risks that are there, as well as the risks of the activity that you're engaged in. Planning for foreseeable emergencies, again, first aid, medical emergency, etc. You have to legislatively you have to plan for that, and if you don't have it in place and something happens, well, obviously that can get you into a bit of trouble. Control of contractors, the management of contractors, very important. Again, if you're engaging a contractor to activity, make sure that they're competent and that they have the appropriate resources to do the work and are compliant with the safety requirements. Management of equipment certification. So looking at equipment certification, etc. I'm going to go through each of these briefly for you. What should be in place with regard to equipment certification, and is it important? Well, there's a major court case coming up around an incident happened at St. John's Bridge in Limerick, where 3 people were suspended over a bridge in a basket to do work on the bridge, and the cage disengaged from the vehicle and went into the water, and 2 people drowned and 1 survived. So the certification of the equipment is one of the key aspects that case is going to court on. There are other issues, but that's one of those, and it's something that we will probably do a briefing on once the court has completed. But it's probably mid-year now. There's a huge delay in the court service at the moment. Are you auditing and reviewing what you do? So again, making sure there's records of audits and checks. Even from your fire safety checks to your equipment checks or whatever the checks that you're doing. That you maintain records of them. And of course, then you review that everything is okay. So January is a good time to review things, what's needed, what's not needed. Most of you would have received a copy of a safety statement that's been updated. And again, we just suggest that you look at that. If there's anything that you want us to review or change, then you just advise us of that. Key mistakes. So safety statement, not company specific. We have some where the legislative entity isn't correct on the safety statement. So in other words, they believe they have a safety statement in place, but because they haven't put the legal entity correctly onto it, then it means that the papers, the safety statement is worthless. In a court situation, it has worth outside of court, but in a court situation, it doesn't. Safety statement not followed. So we say we do, but we don't do what we say. So we audit and we have policies and procedures and this, that, and the other, but we don't have them in place and don't implement them. The safety statement is not circulated to staff, which is a legal requirement, so it should be emailed out to all staff. It's not compliant or up to date with legislation, which is a common one. Safety policies and procedures, not work specific, not comprehensive, so they don't cover what they should cover, not followed. Actually, we have a procedure, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. And again, that gets people in trouble, especially if there's an accident or incident, and not compliant with legislation. And staff not signed off on them. So where does a policy and a procedure, especially where there's risk, staff should be appropriately instructed on that procedure, and there should be a process of getting them to sign off on that procedure to validate that they accept that procedure and are happy with it. You go a little bit further, that they should be assessed for competency to make sure that they're okay with that process. Now, sometimes, you know, having specific training will prove competencies, but other times it might be just observing them doing work over a period of time. And one of the big issues with regard to safety policies and procedures is records aren't maintained. Records of updates of procedures. I was in a company before Christmas where they had 5 different procedures covering the same subject that were in circulation. So the latest and updated version hadn't been circulated appropriately, and the older versions hadn't been asked to be removed and archived. And there was safety implications on all of the reviews. Each one had an important safety update. Safe systems of work, again, very similar to safety procedures, etc. So I'm not going to go through that again, but exactly the same. Training and instruction, no induction. I did a webinar last year on the importance of induction. If you didn't see it, it's up there, it's available. It is very, very important that induction is done. It's done comprehensively. It covers all aspects of the risks that the person may be exposed to, and they're made fully aware of the rules and associated controls that are in place in the workplace. Sometimes inductions are in place, but they're poor. And induction's not signed off. So someone doesn't sign off on induction. In other words, that, oh yeah, we inducted them, have you got records of that? Oh, no, we don't keep records of that. Well, if you don't have a record to say it was that someone was inducted and the contents of that induction, then unfortunately it can't be validated. If it can't be validated, you can't use it as evidence. Training not to the required standard. So again, there are various standards out there for different types of training. It's important that people are trained to the appropriate standard, if there's a standard there, and by a competent person. Sometimes training isn't in place. So we've never had someone trained in manual handling, or we've never had someone trained in the forklift, even though we've got a forklift there for the last 10 years. We've never had to get someone trained. You know, and people don't realize that it's not a case, well, you know, you should. It's a case that you must. Training is a legal requirement in specific areas. Records not maintained or accurate. So keeping records of attendance sheet, keeping records of the training content. We have it all the time where somebody may have an injury, an accident at work, and then we get a request from the insurance company. Oh, you trained this person in this subject in this date, X amount of years ago. Can you please provide us with the following? Can we have confirmation that they attended? Can you have proof of attendance? Can we have competency details of the trainer who provided the training? Can we have the details of the content of the course? Can we have details of any assessments that was completed as part of that course? That's what we get. And we have to get all of that and package it up and send it to the insurance company or the barrister or whatever the case may be, and then possibly have to attend court in the event that it goes to court. You know, so we have to cover and have to have all those accurate records, but we manage that for ourselves, and we manage that for a client if we do the training for them. But if you're getting someone else in to do a training, or you're doing internal training yourself, which is absolutely fine, where you train someone in your workplace, keeping appropriate records, etc., and having good sign-off is very, very important. And the mistakes that are made is, in a lot of cases, the training is done, but records aren't maintained of that training. Supervision. You have to demonstrate that effective supervision is in place. And again, we did a legislative guidance series on supervision and the importance of supervision, what makes a good supervisor, not a good supervisor. And it's very important that effective supervision is in place, because that helps reduce risk. And you have to prove, well, how can you prove effective supervision? Well, it can be done by records of checks and safety talks, etc., that may be had with the staff. Poor or no records of same, again, a common thing where we don't have accurate records. So where we're asked to go in and do investigation following an accident, usually it's serious accidents where we're called in, and we have to do it. It's called a forensic investigation, so forensic from a paperwork and procedures side. And we will start going through the paperwork, and what happens is we find issues of gaps in that paperwork, and that opens liability, unfortunately. So where there isn't gaps, you tend to be able to prove or justify where there is gaps. It creates a void, and I'll explain that later when we get to the court section. Risk assessments. Risk assessments don't reflect activities. Risk assessments are not comprehensive, and staff are not signed off on the risk assessments. Generally, we advise that if you have a policy in place, you have a policy, you have associated risk assessments, and the individual gets signed off on the policy and the risk assessments. And for high-risk activities, we would also suggest that there's a competency assessment after training and after going through the policy to make sure that they are deemed competent to do that. And risk assessments need to be reviewed periodically. Annual is fine, or when circumstances change, or technology changes, or awareness of better control, or awareness of additional risk. They should be reviewed. Planning for foreseeable emergencies, no emergency provisions in place. It's a common one. Control of contractors, one of my favorites. Contractors not evaluated for competency. Contractors not supervised. And contractors not complying with legislative requirements. And I had a very, very serious case where a guy in his mid-30s will not work again. His quality of life has been significantly compromised. I mean significantly compromised. And he's not in a very, very good place. And as far as the company was concerned, he was a contractor and it was his responsibility. And they were duly informed by the HSA, no, he's a contractor and it's your responsibility to manage that contractor and make sure that they work safely and have everything safe. And that's, again, that's going to go before the courts, but it's a long way off because it's only happened last year. Management of equipment certification, again, depending on what you're doing in an office environment, it's very, very little. But you've got the fire alarm, you've got emergency lighting, you've got fire extinguishers. They're all that have to be managed from a certification standpoint. Then somebody who might have a warehousing or whatever might have a forklift truck. There may be a compressor with an air vessel that requires certification. That's a strange one. That's every 26 months, that one. And other work equipment, depending on what you're doing, diggers, dumpers, excavators, etc. If anyone's got confusion over what needs certification and what doesn't, just let us know. Then not only the certification, then there's the inspections, so weekly inspections or that of the equipment to make sure they're okay. And depending on what activities you're in, then there may be further requirements of filling out official forms like GA3s and GA2s for work equipment. But again, that relates more to construction-related activities, which may not be applicable to yourself. Audit and review, safety checks not in place. So yes, we're operating everything, but we're not checking to make sure that it's working. It's not being done. Usually safety reviews start with a supervisor, the person closest to the activity. And then the manager of the supervisor would check the supervisor to make sure that they're doing their job. And then you may have either internally or externally someone coming in to do random audits to validate that things are in place. Safety checks in place and not completed. So yes, we say we're going to do safety checks. We say we're going to do it on a monthly basis, and we go to check the records. In 2021, there was 2 safety checks completed. So that kind of says, well, hold on a second, you say you do 12, but you're actually only doing 2. So is it not best to say, well, we do 2 per year because that's all you can do? Or is it a case that, well, actually, we should be doing the 12, and really it's remiss of us not to do the 12, so we have to look at focus on how can we get those 12 done. No formal review of safety and risk management. Again, I say it should be done on an annual basis just to make sure things are okay. And again, going by the adage that the higher the risk, the more important the review is and the more comprehensive the review should be. And you document that records. Now, if you've got ISO, like Ruth has there, that's mandatory in parts of the ISO system where it's reviewed on an ongoing basis to make sure that things are up to date. Paperwork records, so key mistakes. Duty to keep records, not always kept. Yeah, not always kept. Records to be accurate, not always accurate. Signatures not legible, very important, because how can we say who signed? How can we validate that that person signed? Signed fraudulently. So someone signs on behalf of someone else. Information not correct. Information added in after the effect. And I will tell you, from experience in court, there are people who can pick up a piece of paper, look at it, and start talking and not finish for a couple of hours on one page of paper, explaining the information they can get from that paper. It's amazing watching them. I've learned a little bit. I've learned nothing, but I've learned bits over the years, and how to do things. So here's an example for you. I, the undersigned, wish to confirm that I attended a contractor's safety induction. So we have signed Adam Smith. So ADAM Smith, yeah. And then we have 3 signatures under it. We got 3 dates, 1 missing. And we have again signed over here, our signature over here by Adam Smith. Okay, so obviously illegibility is the problem. We can't understand who these people are because they haven't printed their name. This guy's printed name, but they haven't printed his name. Okay, I leave that for now because we're going to now move into issues with the courts, what the courts look at. Okay, so what happens if you end up in court? What helps you? What doesn't help you? Well, evidence. Documents, policies, procedures, etc. That, as I said, reflect your activities and say what you do. Yes, they're a very good evidence for you in court. Records, forms, audits, training records, etc. that you can produce to validate as evidence that you're compliant. Absolutely, very, very important. Witness statements. Yes, I always challenge witness statements if I feel that they are flowered in a way that they shouldn't be. In other words, people are putting information in that may not be correct or accurate. So I would ask people to rewrite witness statements if I believe that they're not correct. I would have to keep the other versions as well, because in courts you have to, and you have to explain the rationale, because usually when you look at 2 or 3 witness statements, you'll find inaccuracies and you're trying to get to the basis of what the issue is. Company representative statements. This is where a person goes up on the stand and gets questioned by the barrister. And the barrister. So you've got a defending barrister who is operating for yourself, and the prosecuting barrister who is operating for the plaintiff, the person taking the claim, or the state, yeah, depending on, for example, for the HSA, and you give a statement, and the statement should be accurate and reflect what was done. So that's what it goes as evidence in court. You know, so if you have good records, good policies, good procedures, etc., you know, that tends to go reasonably well for yourself. What is the objective in court? Well, your defending barrister is trying to prove compliance. And the prosecuting barrister, all they're trying to do is discredit. So let's go back to our little piece of paper. So this is a confirmation statement for an induction for a contractor who's going into a company. And the defending barrister will say, well, yes, all of those contractors, the employees, they have completed the induction as per this signed document here. And it was dated on the 8th or 12th, 21. That was the day they started the activity. So we're quite happy that induction actually happened and people were inducted. Yeah, I have no further questions. Yeah, so that's your defending barrister. Yeah, prosecuting barrister comes up and says, yes, that's quite interesting, that is. I'm just having a look at that. And I would put it to you that all of that was completed by the one person. Everything we see that's written was completed by the one person, or so my expert witness, who I'm about to take up, will be able to explain to you. The first mistake that was made is that Adam Smith and Alan Smith are supposed to be the same person. So Alan Smith was on site, Adam Smith was not on site. So the person made a mistake. Whoever did it, they made a mistake in that. Secondly, the 3 signatures under Adam Smith are all penned by the same person. It's quite obvious. Again, the expert witness who will outline this, as well as the dates there, with one omission, one is missing. So apart from saying that they completed their induction, this would suggest that they did not complete the induction. And worse, it suggests that this was fraudulently put in place, because this is not an accurate record. What do you think happens next? The defending barrister, after the witness, the expert witness on handwriting, which they probably wouldn't even have to bring up, he says, Your Honor, we a sidebar for 10-15 minutes, please. And they would discuss money, because they know they're in trouble. They know that that's one item. There's just that one item, and everything else could be 100%. That one item will discredit everything. So the importance of accurate records, the importance of getting clear signatures, the importance of ensuring that people do not interfere with documentation. People don't realize it until there's a problem. And when there's a problem, it's as clear as the nose on your face to some people. And you can go all the way to court being told we have a good strong case. All it takes is one item to discredit your case. So paperwork is very, very important. And documented evidence, such as signed induction or signed policies, procedure documents, etc. Clearly print, sign, very, very important. So what are we saying? Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Yeah. Ensure that your paperwork is legislatively compliant and reflects the activity of your organization. It doesn't have to be mad. We were in a facility, it's probably a couple of years ago, maybe, no, it's before COVID, so it's more than a couple of years ago. And I got the fire evacuation procedure. It ran to 48 pages. 48 pages. It was an office. 48 pages. I'm not saying there was anything wrong with it. It was actually fabulous. But nobody was going to read it. No one was going to be aware of how to comply with it. And my comment was 1 page, big writing. That was all was needed. 1 page, big writing, not 48 pages. It was overcomplicated, etc. I know a lot of work went into it, but it wasn't needed. Now, yes, there are times where you do have to put in very, very detailed, but keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Stick to the point. Stick to the management of risk and the associated controls. Keep them clear. Make sure it's understandable and workable for individuals. Effectively, in your documentation, do what you say and say what you do. If you stand by that, you won't go too far wrong. Obviously, keeping an eye on legislative compliance issues, making sure you're compliant with that. Records, keep accurate records. You're required to maintain records. The best advice is to keep them in line with your financial records, which is 7 years. Yeah. So just keep them. Training records and that we tend to keep. If someone's in employment, we will keep records of training for the duration of their employment and until certification expires. Again, I had a call there a couple of weeks ago for someone who's looking for a certificate. We didn't keep it because it was past its certification date. So we keep it, for I think it's a couple of years past certification, and then we get rid of them because just for data purposes. Audit and review. Use audit and review process to update policies and procedures. Yeah. So don't wait for an incident to happen. And use the people involved in the policy or procedure, and say, listen, we have this policy and procedure on this. Any issues with it? We didn't consider this. Okay, well, let's add that in now. So it's not down to one person to update policies and procedures. Policies and procedures should be done by the people. Should involve the people who are engaged in that activity. Do not falsify documents. It just ain't worth it. It just ain't worth it. And it's prosecutable as well. So in other words, you can be prosecuted for that as well, or the company can. So and the HSA do not like it. Now they're not as clued up as barristers, but but still, sometimes it's more than obvious. I mean, what I showed you there was clear and obvious. It wasn't fabricated, or it's just clear and obvious. Okay, so we covered the reason why paperwork can be a friend or foe, the basic requirements of what should be in place. There's lots more, but just the basic requirements. Looked at the common key mistakes, which people make. The paperwork not correct, the paperwork very good, but not following what the paperwork says, not maintaining accurate records of the paperwork, etc. The courts, people say the courts, it's a very gray area. I agree, it is. You can be right going into court and lose. You can be wrong going into court and win. But what tips a case either way can be something very, very small. And what we're saying is just try to ensure that you manage your paperwork so that you're not adding liability. So paperwork is there to mitigate or reduce liability for you, not add liability to you. Okay, finally, keep it as simple as you can, and plain English where possible. And again, a lot of the stuff that we have done is not reducing the compliance burden, but reducing the amount of paperwork and the enormity of some of the paperwork. So trying to keep it simple. Okay. So I'm going to take it off record now, and then we'll open it up to stop recording. We'll open it up to a Q&A.